Season 9 of Night School is presented by the AQHA. Live racing is back at Ruidoso Downs. Keeneland Select. New players can earn a $150 sign-up bonus. Woodbine. Live racing continues at Woodbine and Woodbine Mohawk Park. Queen's Plate Day is Saturday, June 29th. Remington Park. Live quarter horse racing Thursday through Sunday, and Express Bet. Get 5 times reward points every week on the Stronach 5.
Horses have off days, and by looking at them before they actually get on the racetrack, you get an initial impression of which way they're leaning.
This is going to sound crazy, but for me, it's intellectual stimulation.
Class is now in session. It's time for Night School. Here are your hosts.
Welcome, everyone, to Night School, Season 9. The 2019 season rolls on for the National Online Fan Education Program. Here 20 weeks this year to teach you about handicapping the horses. Tonight's topic, one of the most important, maybe the most important in all the handicapping toolbox, we discuss pace. I'm Jeremy Plonk from Horse Player Now, joined by my partner, General Manager Brian W. Spencer. They say pace makes the race. Brian, you agree? Disagree?
Absolutely. I think that it is arguably the most important factor in handicapping. It doesn't necessarily have to be by a long way in every race, but I think that it's always one of the first things I look at in any race, and it is always one of the angles that I weight most heavily in my handicapping, because a bad race flow can absolutely doom a horse who otherwise checks every single box. Sometimes a bad race flow is just too much to overcome, and on the inverse of that, sometimes a very good race flow can carry a horse who otherwise might look in a little bit deep. So I think pace is one of those places where you can really build a good opinion around it, and also sometimes you can still get prices on extreme pace scenarios, whereas in other areas, top connections, huge speed figures, those kill the price immediately.
With pace for our newer players, what we're talking about here in generalities is the shape of the race. Will they go fast early? Will there be one horse out to the front of the pack and the others trailing them? Do they, by their typical running style, many of them want to be up towards the front? Will we have a very contested and hot battle on the front end that could tire those horses out and allow the horses from behind to come make a run? The one thing you want to know about pace and the different styles of running is horses are herd animals in nature, so they want to be at a particular point in comfort in the pack. Some of the horses want to be leading, and that's where they do their best running, and they get brave in the front. Others want to be covered up, as we say, which is down inside horses, with horses to their outside and to their sides, and be tucked in the herd. Others want to drop far back early and then maybe make a sustained run. One thing you want to know about races is they don't necessarily get quicker as they go on. So horses who are from the back of the pack don't run faster at the end of the race. They just sustain their run longer, and maybe they run 25-second quarter miles all the way around the track, while the horses up front may run 22 seconds at the beginning and 26 or 27 seconds in the final quarters of a race. So this is the dynamics of a race and how we put all the pace together. One of the beauties of handicapping horse racing versus some other forms of gambling is the consistency of the past performances. The data that we see from chart callers, from Equibase that turn in this information around the country has the same points of call for each race, no matter the distance, where they are around the country. So a mile race will have the same points of call no matter where it's run at Gulfstream or if it's run at Santa Anita. And when you look at the running lines from left to right in the past performances for each horse in the program or the racing form or the brisk past performances, whatever you use, they're going to be the same because they're turned in by the same chart caller, and they're used universally around the racing industry. So if you see a horse who typically has 1s and 2s in their running lines at the beginning of a race, that tells you that they want to be up first or second and up towards the front of the pack. You can look at these horses, Brian, based on what they've done in the past, and chances are, if things are similar in conditions, they'll repeat those kind of tendencies.
Yeah, most horses, as you mentioned, they, as time goes on in their careers, sometimes there's a little bit of a curve where the connections are figuring the horse out. But generally speaking, horses settle into a running style. A horse who's showing speed in all of his previous races, very likely to show it again. So that's, where obviously the usefulness and the utility of the past performances comes in. But you're talking about looking for those 1s early on. One of the biggest things you can do is, first off, you should be trying to figure out how many pace horses there are, because if you ever find a race, whether it's 1 turn on the dirt, 2 turns on the dirt, doesn't matter. If there's only one horse who has all of those 1s early on in their running lines, that means they're probably what's called a lone speed horse, and that probably the most dangerous kind of horse in all of racing, because speed is an obvious asset in American racing. But the question then is, how many horses does it take for it to be a hot pace? Is 2 speed horses too many? Is 3 speed horses too many? And how does the flow of the race overall, not only those horses forwardly placed, but the ones queuing up behind them, how does that affect a race? And how do, adding one more horse to the speed group as opposed to the closer group, Jeremy, how does that completely change the flow of a race?
Well, it can have a major difference. Generally speaking, if you have 1 speed horse, it's lone speed. That's a great thing. If you have 2 speed horses, the rule of thumb is never fear just one other speed horse. Something could happen to that other horse. He doesn't fire, doesn't get out of the gate, gets carried out on the first turn. You don't fear just 2 speed horses generally in a race. Now, while they can go knock heads with each other and completely ruin themselves, we've seen that in some high-profile races already here in 2019. Generally speaking, it takes 3 or more horses that have early speed to really melt down a pace. 1 horse, you like the speed's chances. 2 horses out front, you still like the speed's chances. 3 or more, now you start to get to worry. 4 and up, you're looking at a scenario where you have to look for horses coming from different points in the pack, either middle of the pack or deep in the field. I like to use what I call the SPMC method. It's abbreviation for speed, press, middle, and closer. These are the 4 different running styles that I've identified and used my entire life. And so I stay with these, and if people want to follow along or have your own nomenclature for them. But I think it's important to group horses in 4 different areas. Speed, horses who like to go up to the front. Press, horses who like to press the pace, which is sit second, third, fourth. They don't necessarily go right to the front, but they're right in the mix. Mid-pack horses, ones who just don't run to the front but don't drop completely out the back end. You'll find the majority of horses fit in that M category for middle. And then the closers, the horses that no matter what happens in a race, they're going to the back of the pack. It takes them a while to get unwound, and then they come with a run. Sometimes that's because of physical issues. A big horse who's really long in the stride takes a while to get going. Think of Zenyatta. I think she's the greatest example. Zenyatta was a deep closer, not because she didn't have speed and talent, because she was so big, it took a long time for her to get rolling. It took a while for her to get out of the gate and get that big engine going. So it can be a physical issue on where some of these horses fit. But again, speed, press, middle, closer, these are the 4 running styles that I like to identify in a race. What I'm doing when I'm handicapping, Brian, is I'm going down each horse in the past performances, looking at their past races and determining, is it a speed? Is it a presser? Is it a middle? Or is it a closer? Then you look at all your different abbreviations of these horses throughout the course of the field. How many S's do I have? How many P's? How many M's? How many C's? And quickly you can plot them and write the numbers down by the clumping in the group, and you might see you've got 5 in one category, 2 in another, 1 in another, and 1 in another. That category that has 5 horses all trying to do the same thing is probably not where you want to look. You're looking for the outliers in a pace scenario. Is it a race where there aren't many closers and there's a ton of speed horses? Then you want the horses who are in the least clumped group. A lot of times that can be the horse who's going to get the best trip. But you're estimating where to put these horses in a clump. It's not science. I know there are pace figures. We'll talk to Randy Moss a little bit in this episode. These can give you a good barometer if you're not just reading the 1s and 2s and the running lines in the past performances. But I think if you try to overanalyze pace, you're going to get burned, because you know what? They don't pay on the backstretch. You're still trying to pick the winners of the race. And if you spend all your time trying to figure out exactly where the pace is going to be, even if you're right, you still might not get paid. So I think this part of the handicapping process is to use good estimation, put horses in clumps, and then see where the chips fall.
I think that's a very good point in the sense that there's always going to be sort of a nuance and a little bit of artistry and creativity in doing this as well. You were talking about grouping horses in those 4 running styles. To me, that is however you name them, that is the way to do it, because as you mentioned, you can get really hung up on specifically where the number 4 horse is going to be and where the number 2 horse is going to be. Unless it's a lone speed situation, I'm not as interested in the specifics of each horse as I am in the overall shape. So, Jeremy has sort of his rule of thumb of anything less than 3 speed horses, and you can probably use those horses. But, what is the case of if you have 2 speed horses and 5 pressers? Those 2 speed horses on one hand might look like they might have a chance, but if you got 4 or 5 pressers lining up behind them, nobody's getting a breather in any way. So in that sense, you might say there's only 2 speed horses, but this race flow is still probably disadvantageous for the speed horses and probably the pressers. So I think it's important to group them in clumps, as Jeremy said, and just to really think of, once you get them in those groupings, then how do those groups move around the racetrack together? When does the speed start to come back? When do those pressers start to make the moves? That's how I envision a race, more as those 4 groups moving around the track than 10, 12 individual horses moving around the track.
Very good point. Now, putting them in the groups, like we said, is a bit of guesstimation. And where do we get into the exceptions? Because an obvious, Zenyatta was an obvious closer, right? Winning Colors was an obvious front runner, the wire-to-wire winner of the 1988 Derby. Some horses are very obvious in where they go, but sometimes you have to do a little bit of more guesstimation. What do you do with, unknown factors? I think in the unknown factors, you put them in the mid-pack, because generally speaking, horses will end up in the middle clump as part of the herd. If you're assessing a horse and you're not sure where they're going to end up, stick them in the mid-pack and then see what that does still to your pace flow. They could go to the front. They could drop out of it. But again, if they're in mid-pack, I don't think they kind of mess around too much with your estimation. The other things I think that are important in whereas your placement of these horses in their respective clumps can change. Distance, right? Is a sprint horse now going in a longer race? If a horse is going from sprint to route and they usually were 4th or 5th early in a sprint race, they're probably going to move up a position or 2 going long. So whatever their running lines suggest, if they start to go longer distances, you got to project them up a little bit further and a little bit closer to the front. Post position can be a big difference here. Horses with extreme post, far inside or far outside, maybe used a little bit harder by their jockeys to get position at the beginning of a race. So a far inside or far outside position can influence where you put a horse. Generally, you will move those horses up in your estimation. If you have a horse who's drawn far outside, you may move them further back, though, based on their running style. If they're kind of a mid-pack horse and drawn far outside, the jockey's more likely to drop to the back, come over, and save some ground. So post position can be a key there, something you want to look at. Jockeys. Do particular jockeys run towards the front or take horses from off the pace? I think you want to know your riders on a particular circuit, because moving to a speed jockey may move this horse up a little bit in a race because of rider intent wanting to get up there. And of course, equipment changes, things like blinkers on, typically make a horse run a little bit more alert and into the race early. So if you see a horse who's been running 5th, 6th early in races and now puts blinkers on, you probably want to move them up maybe up into the presser category, something to consider, and also a perceived bias. If it's the 7th race on the card and all the jockeys have seen speed win throughout the day, there's probably going to be a chance for you to rip up your pace scenarios, because a lot of those jocks who are riding mid-pack horses are suddenly going to want to go towards the front. So extreme pace bias situations, track bias situations, can affect the pace too. Brian, any other unique situations to your evaluation?
Well, I mean, I think just the general, to kind of put a bow on the pace discussion is still how important it is. It might sound like an old cliche to say pace makes the race. We've all heard that, but still, it is one of the, if not the only, one of the very few categories and angles in horse racing where I will blindly bet a horse. I will blindly bet a lone speed horse solely from the race shape. I'm never going to blindly bet connections. I'm never going to blindly bet other speed figures. But if you give me an absolute extreme pace scenario, no questions asked. I will take my chances with that race shape, and that is why pace is overall still, to this day, everything else that we have to include in our handicapping, pace, the old standby, still so important.
And there's not a single race that doesn't have pace. It's going to be involved in every one of your handicapping endeavors. Randy Moss of NBC Sports, the Buyer Speed Figures and Daily Racing Forum with his Moss Pace Figures, has been a guest many times over the years in Night School. He joined us to talk about pace in our Night School trip to the vault. We'll listen to Randy, and after that, Caton Bredar, the First Lady of Night School, chimes in her thoughts about pace.
Bet and cheer on live racing from Woodbine and Mohawk Park. Thoroughbred and harness action. The wagers are just the beginning. Watch award-winning broadcasts covering both breeds, incredible battles contested over the most unique grass course in North America. Experience the full fields with over 130 thoroughbred and 160 live harness days. Get access to free handicapping material and join the ranks of Woodbine and Mohawk Park players from all over the globe. For more information, visit woodbine.com.
Strategize, analyze, select. Join Keeneland Select to bet on racing from around the world on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, anytime, anywhere. Featuring the best rewards in racing, free pass performances, live video, race replays, and more. Plus, Keeneland Select invests a portion of its profits back into the sport. Join Keeneland Select today and earn a $150 sign-up bonus at KeenelandSelect.com. Dedicated to the sport and dedicated to the players.
Some folks like to bet on the horses. Some like to bet on the games. Some folks like to bet on their phone. And some like to bet from their suite. So what's your best bet? All of the above. No matter how you like to bet, Remington Park is your best bet yet. With world-class horse racing, OKC's newest casino, and online suite booking now available. Remington Park, it's your best bet yet.
Hey, what's going on? Mikey here, and I'm going to tell you about an offer from my good friends at ExpressBet. Let's be honest, we know you love playing the races, but you can't always make it to the track. Sometimes life just gets in the way of a good bet. Well, what if I told you about a place where you never miss a bet and you start with house money? You'd say I'm crazy, right? Well, not at ExpressBet. Your first $100 are on them. That's right. Sign up with expressbet.com using promo code XBRadio, bet $100, and they'll deposit $100 back into your account the very next day. Hey, plus you could get an extra $25 if you use Express Fund Direct Deposit. You see what I mean? House money for betting the races. It's that easy. Check it out at expressbet.com to learn more. And don't forget to sign up with promo code XBRadio. You're gonna love it. And that's a Mikey guarantee. Must be 18 years or older and 21 years old in certain states to open an account with ExpressBet and reside in a state where such activity is legal. Void where prohibited. National Gambling Support Line 800-522-4700.
Welcome back to the show. Enjoy this classic night school clip from the vault.
Pace figures are derived essentially from tens of thousands of races run in the United States over the last 20 years to give you an average shape of how most races at 6 furlong, 6.5, 7, all the distances run in American racing are commonly run at the different class levels, okay? Then you look at each particular racetrack and you compare them to the national average to see how much the run-up distances, for example, affect the fractional times. And you make adjustments for each racetrack, and you take the fractional times, you adjust them for the idiosyncrasies of those particular tracks, and that's where the pace figures come in. It's a pretty complicated mathematical approach, but it's pretty simple. The higher the pace number, the faster the pace is. One thing I want to throw in there, by the way, about the cheap speed question, okay? If there's one thing that pace figures teach you, it's in American dirt racing, anytime you get a horse that you can project to be on a clear early lead, regardless of the price. I don't care if the horse looks like cheap speed, he's 20-1, he's 30-1, he's 40-1. If you think he's going to make a clear early lead and he's a decent price, he's a good bet. He's a long-term good bet. Enough of those horses hang on to defy what class handicappers think of them, that they're very profitable in the long run if they can control the pace.
Set to close out the show now with our visit from Caton Bredar to talk with us about pace handicapping. And Caton, we've talked a little bit about how pace makes the race and what to expect when you're handicapping a race and trying to incorporate pace into it. Kind of walk us through how you use pace. Where in the handicapping process does that come in, and how much importance do you put on pace as part of that process to finding a winner?
Well, I think a pace is extremely important. I would list it among my top, say, 3 categories of criteria that I consider initially. Joining class with another, and then basically flow of the race is tied to pace, but speed in general kind of in a category all itself. When you talk about pace, there is one thing that I think is really important to remember, and that is that if you think about it from a human perspective, when you are out there doing your own thing, regardless of how fast or slow you're going, you usually have a little easier time of it physically than if you have somebody right by your side breathing down your neck. Now, horses are similar in that regard. And rule of thumb is when you have 2 or more horses that are going to have the same style of being, say, speed horses, or horses that are going to be showing speed early on, regardless of how fast or slow they go, they're probably going to exert themselves more than if they were doing it all by themselves. So when I'm looking at pace in a race, I'm not only looking at how fast each individual horse is but I'm looking at how many of each category there are to be able to tell whether horses are going to have an easier time of it or a harder time of it. The rule of thumb is usually 2 or less. You really give added emphasis to speed horses, and more than 2, 3 or more, you're going to give maybe a little added emphasis to the horses who don't have to be on the lead, horses that either can sit middle pack or toward the back of the pack. And in part, that's due to that idea that when you have a bunch of horses all competing for the lead, it's going to take more of a toll than if you were by yourself or you only had one horse to contend with. The other part of that is if you have 2 horses, only 2 horses that are speed types, it's highly possible that one of the 2 might not get away from the gate very easily or might have an off day, which then leads to that lone speed type, which is probably the most dangerous type of horse in terms of handicapping, because any horse at any category competition is dangerous if left alone on the lead. And that is something that I respect regardless of category or class or anything else. But that said, then you do the second element of the handicapping process is to really evaluate, well, even if this horse is alone on the lead, is he really good enough to win? And sometimes you're going to have a long shot, a horse that really just has no ability, but they do have early speed, and they kind of inflate the pace of the race, or but they are not necessarily a win play. But those, I'd say, are rarer than the horses that, if left alone on the lead, are going to be factors or horses that you really have to consider.
Certainly, and as Jeremy and I touched on earlier in the episode, it still is true at any level. Pace, a very key factor in the handicapping process. And thanks to Caton for closing out this episode of Night School with us. We'll be back again next week. We'll be looking at exacta betting then. Look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Good night.
Next on FAQ 60, hooking up. One popular handicapping angle in American quarter horse racing has a catchy name and a place in the toolbox of many horse players: hooking up. That's when 2 horses racing alongside one another hook up and bring out the best in each other. Many horses run only as fast as those around them, so breaking next to the fastest horse in the race can be a perfect date. Hooking up also makes sense as a handicapping angle when you consider traffic trouble. Often the race winner is the fastest horse who has the cleanest trip. By running alongside a horse with a clean trip, the runner-up can have smooth sailing. Remember, what's lucky for good old number 7 can also be good for numbers 6 and 8. This FAQ 60 is presented by AQHA Racing and Horse Player Now.
Enjoyed tonight's episode? Check out hundreds of past archives at horseplayernow.com.